You know what they say about Steam festivals: if you can't join them, make your own.
What I noticed was that it's quite hard nowadays to get accepted into festivals. So I decided why not, kind of try and fix that for both myself and some of the other members of the Discord. And they make it pretty easy to go through the application process. So it wasn't too difficult, really. And there weren't many barriers. So if there's anyone out there that is thinking about running their own festival, then hopefully you can learn a little bit about my story in running a festival as well. But yeah, it was kind of surprising how kind of streamlined the process was in getting it started.
That was Cian, the developer of Puppy Park, which is a new cozy game that has come to Steam, and he found a bit of a marketing loophole in terms of Steam marketing, in that it's getting increasingly harder to join festivals on Steam because there's just more competition than ever, but it's actually not that hard to run your own. Now, not hard in the sense of being able to start it, but logistically there's a lot of interesting things that Cian learned that goes into making a successful festival, and he was excited to share in that conversation. We also went into a deep dive into his cozy game, as I mentioned, and did some design talk there as well and talked about him as a developer. It was a really great conversation, and I'm super excited to share. If you're enjoying these videos, be sure to hit subscribe to let YouTube know that you're enjoying it, and it just helps out the channel. Here we go. Okay, so something I'm trying to get better at is leading with something interesting. So definitely going to spend some time asking you about kind of your journey and your development. But I think a cool place to start, something interesting that you're bringing that I haven't talked to anyone else about, is that you've ran your own festival. So can you just start off by telling me, how do you actually even go about running a Steam festival? I know nothing about it.
So I think it's quite an interesting story how I got into running a festival in the first place. So it wasn't something that was really on my radar until I started applying for festivals myself. And what I noticed was that it's quite hard nowadays to get accepted into festivals. And I noticed a lot of people on the How to Market a Game Discord channel are just saying similar experiences, like hard to get into festivals. So I decided why not, kind of try and fix that for both myself and some of the other members of the Discord. So I just kind of started looking into it. And I'm also part of another Discord of festival organizers that I can link down in the description, but and they were super helpful in getting set up. But it's pretty much a process that's open to anyone. You just apply through Steamworks on Valve, which is the platform that you use to upload your game to Steam anyway, and they make it pretty easy to go through the application process. So it wasn't too difficult, really, and there weren't many barriers. So if there's anyone out there that is thinking about running their own festival, then hopefully you can learn a little bit about my story in running a festival as well. But yeah, it was kind of surprising how kind of streamlined the process was in getting it started.
Yeah, it's really funny because it's something that is very much in the kind of collective mindset of all of us indie game devs out there, of like getting into festivals is a really powerful thing, but I never have heard someone talk about just create your own. It's like, if you can't beat them, join them, but maybe there's a different, like, if you can't join a festival, just make your own. It's pretty funny. So I'm pretty excited to dive in and see how that went for you. Does it cost anything? Is there any kind of similar, like, you have to pay $100 to put a game on Steam? Is there anything like that?
No, there is not an application fee or anything like that. The only thing I would say is I paid for some promotional assets for the festival. So the assets you'll see when you go to the page. But outside of that, I guess technically you wouldn't have to pay for that either if you're an artist or wanted to do that yourself. But yeah, I guess it's just getting through the application process. But yeah, nothing up front.
Yeah, how did you decide the criteria for what games would be in? I know you said you connected with some other developers that were having a hard time, but was there anything specific that you implemented, a certain type of genre or size of developer, or how did you approach it?
So that's a very good question. And I ended up running into a little bit of a problem due to the way I selected games, which we can circle back to at the end. But because of the way and the spirit in which the festival was set up in the first place, I didn't really want to deny anyone the opportunity to be in the festival. It started out as a result of me getting kind of declined from the Wholesome Snack Festival, I think it's called. A lot of the games that applied to my festival were a similar kind of vibe to that as well, including my game. But it wasn't like a hard requirement. But I kind of went with that kind of theming in the end anyway. So the festival ended up being called Wholesome Underdogs, kind of as like an underdog story for games that don't make it into the big festivals. And at the start, yeah, I was kind of just like casting a wide net because I didn't even know at that point how many games would be in the festival. At the end, I had no idea of like the magnitude of it. So I kind of just put the application form out there and kind of just let it see what happens.
Yeah, did you find out why you were declined from the other festival that you tried to get into?
No, probably just because the game didn't have enough traction or wasn't visually appealing enough. I do have some sympathy now having ran my own festival, but there is a lot of applications. Like, I think most festivals now get over 1,500 applicants. So
Wow.
it's a lot of games for someone to have to sit down and go through and vet. So yeah, I'm not sure how other organizers decide how to, vet their selection process, but I imagine that it's quite strict, and you don't hear back much in terms of like, this is why we didn't let your game be in the festival.
Yeah, how many applicants did you end up with? And at any point, did you start to turn people down because of the volume?
Yeah, yeah. So when I opened the application, I had about 300 games signed up, and I, at that point, went into the How to Market a Game Discord and kind of said, there's. I emailed Chris and he very kindly put the festival on the kind of events release
Oh, very
section of
nice.
the Discord. And yeah, the applications really started flooding in. So I was basically like, okay, I'll leave them open for about a month and then it'll have to close at some point. And in the end, we had over 750 games in the festival.
It's a lot of
And again,
games.
we will come back to why that is not a good idea. But yeah, so lots of games ended up signing up, thanks to Chris as well.
Yeah, something else I was curious about is are all festivals like kind of treated equally on Steam? Was your festival showing up on the front page for a lot of people? Or is it like there's all the time lots of small festivals going on that we don't see? What was your experience with that?
Yeah. So essentially, when you apply to run a festival, it's completely up to Valve what they decide is the level of featuring that you get for your festival. But there are two main kind of levels of visibility. There's the Steam takeover page on the front page that you'll see for like Next Fest and Valve run events, and certain times I think there's one now for really big publishers, so potentially either really big publishers or people that have run many events before and have proven that their events bring in a certain amount of traffic themselves or are of high quality, but there's no guidelines for this. It's kind of just you have to apply and Valve will tell you yes or no. And then there's the second level of visibility, which is basically automatic for every person that gets accepted to run an event on Steam. There's a little on the store page that says events and sales or something like that. And every single festival, actually, I think mine was in this one as well, but every festival will appear in that list, I think. But one of the other benefits of running a festival, if your game is in one, then there's a banner that appears above your store page that can link to that festival. So
Oh,
if
okay.
you're in a festival with other big games, they will draw in people to your festival and then they'll see your capsule hopefully alongside them. That's one of the biggest draws, I think, where all the visibility comes from outside of if you have one of these big store takeover pages.
Yeah, I'm making some notes of maybe at the end we can try to wrap up with some like takeaways of
Yeah,
things to focus on. And so it sounds like getting successful games is maybe the number one thing you can control. Um,
absolutely.
did you find anything else? Go ahead.
I think that's why another part of why the selection process is quite strict for a lot of festivals.
Hmm.
They just, it's in your best interest to fill your festival with big games, so
Yeah.
and ones that already
Yeah.
have a track record.
Did you find anything else, either just in coming through it or in your research? Like, if is there anything like hitting 7,000 wish list gets you another, more visibility? Is there anything like that with festivals where you lead to so many sales and you get bumped to something, or is that kind of an unknown entity?
As in being a game inside a festival. Is that what you
I
mean?
think I mean the festival overall. Like, is
Right.
there any way once the festival's going to get in that top tier of visibility that you were talking about?
I don't know, to be honest,
Yeah.
but I'd imagine Steam does keep track of kind of the revenue generated kind of from impressions from your festival, and they'll have a pretty good idea of whether to kind of bump your visibility. Similar to how, releasing a game works on Steam as well. If you're selling really well, then they're incentivized to promote your game even more. So I think it's a similar kind.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's kind of what I assumed, but I hadn't heard anyone talk about it, so I wondered if there was if this is a gap in the market, maybe we need to get Chris Zukowski on it and see if he can track down all the data and organize all the festivals. But anyway, speaking of organizing, and maybe this will tie into kind of your wrapping up thoughts and some of the problems you had, but how did you organize the games in the fest? I did a quick Google search, and one of the things that popped up with like how to run a festival well is like choosing how to organize them. So how did you approach that?
Yeah, I got many emails from event participants just asking about like where will my game appear in the festival? What kind of widgets do you have? So Steam have some pretty clear guidelines that most of the sections in your festival should be these automatic sections that Steam kind of decides the games for. So you'll see things like popular upcoming, demos, recently released, things like that. And they say that yeah, the majority of the festival should be made up of widgets that Steam can kind of populate dynamically. And that's just to make sure that, for example, if I'm a festival organizer, I can't take, money to put games at the top and things like that. So, I mean, I'm sure potentially you could do that, but yeah. So there's some guidelines to kind of set those out. But then some of the kind of sections that I had were genre related. So some of the bigger genres they've crept up recently. So like co-op simulator. I was planning on having a horror section, but then I realized it wouldn't make much sense. So I think I got rid of that at the end. But like roguelikes, things like that. So there is some level of kind of, you can choose what order everything shows up in, what sections you have. But the general consensus is, have a lot of sections and maybe genre based. And, I think that about covers it.
Yeah, can you help me understand how much time you think you spent organizing the festival, and then maybe what were just the broad categories? Like, was a lot of that managing application? Was a lot of that, working inside of the Steam backend? How did that work out?
So obviously, well, it might not be obvious, but I released a game recently. So a lot of my time was dedicated to the game more than the festival. So I did have quite a hands-off approach when organizing it. But I don't think I spent ultimately that long kind of organizing the festival. I made a sign-up form that it was just a Google form, and I kind of made a Reddit post, put in the Discord, things like that. But let's say for 4 days of part-time work, a couple of hours every day, just kind of, putting the assets in the right place, organizing the categories. It wasn't a super intense experience.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and this might be a good time. I do want to talk about Puppy Park, and I have some design questions about it. But before we wrap up with the festival, maybe just to help people with the context of why you chose this festival, can you give just the short description of Puppy Park? And then later, I do want to do like kind of a deep dive into it.
Absolutely. So Puppy Park is essentially a real-time dog hotel management game. So if you think of Nintendogs, that kind of real-time aspect of caring for your dogs, I kind of wanted to boil that down as small as I can and kind of maybe, I don't know, make people remember kind of nostalgic. Because it was one of the first games I played. I think I was probably about 5 or 6 when I got a DS and got Nintendo. So it was just, good vibes, kind of good spirited project, I think. And that's how it started.
Yeah, it immediately stood out to me as a very like kind of beautiful, pretty game, and it kind of evokes Nintendogs, even though it is a different style. Like that was one of the
Yeah.
first things I thought about. And I didn't own a DS for a long time as a kid, but I had a friend that had one, and when I would like stay at his house, I would like play Nintendogs on his DS because it was such a fun little game. With that being in the festival and, this kind of being an interesting little, maybe like marketing trick to run your own festival, do you think it helped Puppy Park to be in the festival?
The data isn't super conclusive, honestly. And I think a large part of that is because my festival ended up having some kind of reduced visibility due to the number of games that was in it and kind of, not living up, matching Valve's guidelines for running events. So it's hard to say. I would have thought that it would have had a bigger impact if I kind of hit those visibility thresholds. But ultimately, I would say if you're planning on releasing a game in a certain genre and you have the time to plan a festival around it and you get accepted, it's per hour of effort. It definitely is worth it. But one thing I think that's happened recently is a lot more people have gotten into running their own festivals. They've kind of seen this kind of meta changing where random people like me can just apply to run a festival. It might be the case, and I think I've already started to see it happen, where some festivals are getting declined, or there's just more strict kind of criteria for running festivals. So it's one of those things. It's a constantly evolving kind of moving target, and I think if you can catch the wave, then go for it.
Yeah, it sounds like this might be a bit of a closing door in like being a big opportunity for solo developers in particular if they're going to start cracking down. So maybe if someone has a game coming in the next 9 months, like this year,
Yeah.
and then who knows, maybe the goalpost will move. I would love to discuss some of those problems you mentioned and some of the stuff you learned. You mentioned there was a problem with maybe the array of games or the amount of games you had in your festival. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah. So when I started the festival, there weren't, or the start of the application process, there weren't super strict guidelines for things like number of games in the festival or kind of like scope of the theme of the festival. But what I think happened between then and now is that there were a few festivals that kind of had maybe too many games that were not closely related to each other. And Valve kind of spotted this trend and kind of decided we're going to stop that trend from happening. And, they're within their, I'm not saying they changed the guidelines or anything like that in regards to my festival, but maybe that's kind of part of the story of kind of what happened. And maybe if I made the festival a couple of months ago, it might have gotten through, might not have. I don't have the full story, unfortunately, but yeah.
Sure. Do you think you ended up with too many games in the festival?
Yeah, it's interesting to kind of define what too many games feels and looks like, because my reference for Valve festivals is, for example, Next Fest I think had maybe 3,000 games this Next Fest in February, and that got front page takeover. So obviously, I mean, there probably is an upper limit to the amount of games that you want in a festival, but it's hard to say what that number would be without Valve saying this is the number, especially when they run events themselves that are orders of magnitude higher than that number. So
Right.
It's hard to know.
Yeah. So after you've wrapped this up, if you were going to do it again, what would be your main takeaways of like the 2 to 5 most important things or things that you would do differently if someone else is watching this and they've got a game releasing in November and they're thinking about doing the same thing?
Yeah, just keep the scope low enough to about maybe 100 to 200 games. And I would recommend picking a genre. I think Valve likes that as a clear definition of scope. Because if you have something like Wholesome or Cozy, that kind of is up to interpretation. I mean, I guess genres of games are up to interpretation as well, but it's quite common knowledge what a game genre would be just by looking at it, I think. Or it's just easier to tell as opposed to something like genre or style. So probably choose the genre of your game, especially if it's like one of the hot ones that marketers are always talking about. Because Valve would like that as well, because they'll probably make more money. So if you're making a Friendslop game, do the Friendslop festival and etc.
Yeah. Any other big takeaways? You mentioned you feel like you saw lower visibility for not matching Steam's guidelines. What did you mean?
Yeah. So I mentioned earlier that if a game is in a festival, then a banner will appear above the game on the store page. So literally, if you're on the store page for Puppy Park, there would have been a banner above it that says, this game is in the Wholesome event, Wholesome Festival. But that didn't happen for my festival. So that there are some widgets like that they kind of remove from Steam based on the kind of level that you hit visibility-wise, or what you qualify for as a festival. And I think those kind of widgets do drive a lot of traffic to the festival, which is kind of what I was alluding to earlier.
Yeah. Do you think it was worth your time?
Yeah, absolutely. It didn't take a lot of my time anyway. And outside of, pure sales and things like that, just meeting people along the way, getting help, just making connections of other people that have run festivals, and maybe even building up like some kind of goodwill, amongst game developers. Not that I'd expect many people to know who I am, but if you see me on the Discord, maybe you might have.
Yeah, well, it's a fascinating little experiment. I'm excited for people to potentially try this as well and kind of just see what people think, in the comment section. And yeah, I think like you said, it's similar to this YouTube channel in that it's not making a lot of money or anything like that, but I am making a lot of connections. And so even just for that, for especially a new developer, I think there's probably a ton of value. Like if you get connected to even one or two of the big solo developers in your genre, that's like hugely valuable if you can even just, have them as a basic connection to reach out twice a year for advice or anything like that. So it sounds like running a festival is a really cool idea, and I'm glad we got to chat about it. That's been fun. Now, I would like to
Absolutely.
transition and talk about you a little bit. So, kind of just your journey and kind of build the lore, so to speak. So,
Absolutely.
how long have you been making games?
I've been making games purely casually for quite a bit. Um, I'd say probably about 10 years I've just been messing around in Unity. And then when I was about 18, so 7 years ago, 8 years ago, I started entering game jams like GMTK, and that kind of just, yeah, kept kind of building up. It was quite gradual. It was just maybe 2 or 3 game jams a year. So I probably have made 15 small projects before my first kind of Steam release. But a couple of years ago, I just decided to kind of take a career break and just release a couple of games and see what happens and go from there. But now I'm still full time employed. I'm not a full time game developer yet, but that would be the end goal one day. But
Yeah, very cool. Now, I saw that A Puppy Park was the second game released under the developer name TM39, and you
yeah,
also did Dino Park. Is that just you, or have you
yeah.
worked with other people? Yeah.
Yeah. So my first game is under my name on Steam and isn't under
Oh, cool.
TM39. And that was a small arcade game called Rocket that wasn't very commercially viable, but was kind of just I just quit my job and it was a 1 month long project. And I was like, I want to see what a game on Steam looks like, what goes into, all the back end. And I'd really recommend to anyone that like has this idea of a not even a dream game, but a game that they've put a lot of effort into. It is worth just going through the process on a different game that you don't mind making mistakes on, because there are a lot of things that you do need to consider that you just wouldn't know unless you've gone through the process. So things like release date timing, signing up to festivals, and all these things. Like Next Fest, for example, will have a deadline that's a couple of weeks before that you need to have a demo for, and the builds for the demo take time to review from Valve. So there's this long chain of things that are kind of out of your control, and you need experience kind of interacting with to have a successful launch, I think.
Yeah, the Steam backend is slightly unintuitive, and there's just like a few things along the way you wouldn't expect. Like everybody's first build gets rejected, it feels like, or some image
Yeah,
gets flagged. And so I think it's really smart. Like if you have, even if you're already almost done, I would say with your first major project, just
yeah.
make something small, like you said, a 1 month project, just to run those things out so that when you're ready for the big one, nothing gets messed up because, the timing of things matters quite a bit, I think, for like marketing and hitting your next fest and stuff like that. So I'm with you. That's a really smart plan. Okay, now I would love to dive into a little bit more of Puppy Park. So you said it was inspired by Nintendogs. How much did you try to draw from the same like kind of core, or how much did you try to make it different than Nintendogs?
So the idea kind of came around after I finished Dino Park. I was kind of just thinking of a new project, and I think it was around the same time that Minami Lane was having a lot of success. So I kind of knew that I wanted to try a project kind of in a similar vein. And from there, I was just kind of brainstorming, and I just remembered kind of my roots gaming. And I also thought of this kind of like phenomenon where I think trends kind of come around every 20 years. If you look at kind of like fashion or kind of media, they'll usually be like a reboot every 20 years. So I thought, why not? It's kind of just like an idea for like I like to think about game ideas as kind of like you generate the system for kind of thinking about how to make games, and then when you fail, you kind of update the model, and then you have a better idea of what your next game idea should be like. So I was just kind of writing the maybe nostalgia is a part of that decision making, things like that. Let's try it out and see whether it's successful.
Yeah, I love that idea of like thinking about like a fashion cycle, but for video games. And so there's probably a lot we can do there as developers if you're looking for inspiration to say, what was popular 10, 15, 20 years
Yeah.
ago? So that's really smart. I like that a lot. How long did it take you to make Puppy Park?
It's kind of hard to quantify because I started it in 2024, but then I took a very long break just amongst work and things like that. But I think, and I haven't been counting the hours, but I think it's about 6 months of part time, like real part time work, maybe 15 hours a week. So I kind of have a ballpark of maybe 400 hours. But there's a big caveat. I didn't do the art myself. So I commissioned the vast majority of the art for the game, all of the cool dogs and things like that. Because I kind of identified that one, my artistic talents aren't very good. But for this style of game, I think kind of the art needs to shine through a little bit to kind of get people, to kind of gain some traction or just have people engage with the game.
Yeah, that was going to be one of my questions because the art style is really good. Like it's this very cool, illustrative, very well done work. How did you go about the process of finding an artist? And can you tell me just a little bit about your back and forth and kind of what that looked like?
Absolutely. So another one of my ideas for kind of this game idea systematic kind of approach was I'd imagine that artists that already have success on social media would produce more art that is successful in social media. So the idea was that I will search social media for an artist in kind of I kind of knew what kind of style I wanted to evoke. So I kind of just went through the top pages of Instagram, for example, and found a couple of people and messaged one, and it just kind of went from there. And it's been a great experience working with them.
So this person was a game artist or just an illustrator?
Just an illustrator. Yeah, they make super cute little doodles on Instagram, and I reached out to them, and they were open for some commissions.
Yeah, something I've been curious about in working with an artist is was there any friction in getting the right file sizes or getting their art into the game, or was it pretty seamless?
There were a few hiccups that I definitely wasn't anticipating, but it was more on me just not being clear about the requirements. It is a very different thing having a piece of art for just art and having a piece of art that fits in a
Yeah.
game. So there was quite some trial and error on my part to just request the right things because it was kind of like it wasn't a working together on the game kind of relationship. It was like a commission based relationship. So I just set out the requirements, they delivered, and then that was pretty much the interaction. So it was just me learning over time how to kind of bridge the gap of what I think I want and what I actually want for the game.
Yeah, I definitely can imagine that like if I were to do that, I would need to build that skill of translating what I need, unless you're working with specifically a video game technical artist that's going to dump it in for you. So yeah, I was just
Absolutely.
curious about that.
One of one of my kind of philosophies, I guess, which is why I've kind of came out with the previous games that I've made, is just the easiest way to learn is just to have exposure to something. And that's why everyone on YouTube talks about, release your first game, just get it out, all these things. Cause there's so many things that you just, even if you thought about it in your room over and over again, you just wouldn't get to the answer that you're expecting. And there's just a few things you just need to kind of experience in real life to kind of get the end result. So I try to spend as much of my time kind of like actively interacting and pursuing the thing for the result that I want, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it's a super good word. And even connecting it to things like if you're going to do commission work, you need to develop essentially like project management skills almost. Like you've got
Absolutely.
to not only have an idea, but communicate it and do the back and forth. So, yeah, that's a really good word, I think. Considering the art style and kind of sorry, did you have another thought?
A thought just popped into my head about the name, like why I release games under a banner, and it's just because I might work with a multitude of people in the future or just commission. So it was just easier to kind of spread the credit around like a name rather than my name, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. And then I think it probably like locks you in a little bit less to one type of game. Not that you can't if it's
Yeah,
your own
yeah.
name, but it feels a little more like a studio.
Or even publishing other games that you don't necessarily develop as well. It does just kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, keep those doors more open, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's super clever. A little bit back to the art style and just kind of the vibe that this game has. I can't remember if you already said it, but would you call it a cozy game?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was kind of the vibe that I was trying to fit into because of the popularity of other games around the time that I started the idea. Not necessarily today or this week when it released, because I think there's a there's been more games in that kind of style that have released and kind of maybe taken more of the market share, if you want to use that term. But yeah.
Yeah, so I'm not much of a cozy gamer myself. So I'm curious if one, if you're a cozy gamer yourself, and even if not, what did you find in the making of this game or through the games that you play? What makes a cozy game appealing?
That's a extremely funny question for me. So I have basically exclusively played competitive games since
Oh,
I was 15
interesting. Very interesting.
or even earlier. So I have 8,000 hours in Dota 2, and that was the main game that I played.
That's
And I tried
that's
playing it
amazing.
semi competitively as well. So it's very rare that I actually kind of take a step back to play more relaxing games. I definitely have in the past. And I definitely have played more since developing this game to kind of get a better understanding of kind of what the target audience wants in these games. Maybe the game wasn't as successful as it could have been had I, had more experience playing these types of games and things like that. So I don't think you strictly need to only make games that you play, and especially that would be hard for me because I'm not going to make a MOBA or a competitive shooter or anything like that in my bedroom. So yeah, it would be a bit harsh to say you can only make games that you play yourself. But I guess just try to be proactive in kind of reaching out to the people that do play those games. I mean, I've been fortunate enough to kind of throughout the process connect with people that play those games. So for example, I had a volunteer for the trailer to do some voice acting, and they were super amazing and also helping me with kind of QA and what they expect in a game like that. Because they reached out because they saw my project on Reddit and they thought, this is exactly the kind of game that I'd like to play and be a part of and all this. So you kind of, yeah, you kind of figure it out along the way with the help of some very nice and talented people. So
Yeah, that's very cool. It's so funny you bring up not really being a person that plays these games because every podcast I do now, I'm opened up to the many different ways you can like have towards success. So I interviewed another developer, Payne Robinson, that was like, play a bunch of games. That's the most important thing. Play a bunch of games. But as we're talking, I do think there's something valuable about making a game in a genre that you don't normally play in, just that you can detach yourself emotionally, I would imagine, just a little bit. Um, and, so I think there's a balance there and that you can definitely explore genres that you're not playing every day yourself and maybe either learn about it or find, maybe even bring a new spin on it because you're an
yeah,
outside player.
yeah. So I was thinking about this potentially for my next game. I didn't particularly do this for Puppy Park, but because I like to play more competitive games and they kind of keep you in this cycle of dopamine and engagement and all these things. But cozy games don't really do that. So I imagine you could kind of make a marriage of games that maybe are cozy but have more of these like, I don't know, mechanics that keep you involved in the game and things like that. But it's funny because for my game, I kind of did the opposite. Like my game actively discourages playing for a long time and things like that. Um, so yeah, it's just about finding the balance between bringing in things from your experience in other games that you think would benefit the genre without upsetting the target audience of the genre. Like for example, if I added a competitive leaderboard to my game, I don't think many people would be very excited to play. So it's just understanding who your market is and things like that.
Yeah, that leads really well into my next question, talking about just kind of the design space of the game. So you went with a real time game,
Yeah,
meaning you're kind of supposed to check in every day. Time is
yeah.
passing as normal. Why did you go that route?
It kind of just naturally developed itself. I think at the start, because I was drawing inspiration from Minami Lane, I thought it would be just a standard non real time game. But then as I got more inspired by Nintendogs, I was like, it has been a while since a game like this has existed. So maybe there was a little bit of, you know, originality that I could market, things like that. I don't think it ended up being a very good idea for like a mass market approach because I think like Steam algorithms and also streamer algorithms like depend a lot on being able to play games and repeat games, as long as you want. And my game basically does the opposite. So it's basically, you wouldn't really see a streamer playing the game, and the people that bought it on day one would only play it for 20 minutes, for example. So both of those things are kind of working against the concept of a real-time game, which is probably why you don't see them, to be fair. I mean, that's another good, marketing adage, I think, which is like, if you think you have a blue ocean or whatever, you probably don't. And everyone's been there before and decided it's a really bad idea. But yeah, I mean, ultimately, I don't think I regret making a game real time. And some of the feedback from players has been really, really positive, and it's really nice to hear. Like, people say things like, "Oh, I've been waiting 20 years for a game like this," and that you can't really put a price on that. I mean, I guess you can if you're trying to make a living making games,
Sure.
but it's quite a nice feeling to have, make a game that has an impact on at least a handful of people. So that's nice.
Yeah, it definitely seems like the game that could draw in even just like a small audience that just love it. One thing that I thought about in thinking about this type of game, I'm wondering if you saw any feedback like this or thought about it, is that it also might just be the right game for the wrong platform. Like, even
Yeah.
when I think about Nintendogs, you can flip open a DS and play for 10 minutes, but it's a little more friction to start up my laptop and play for 10 minutes.
Literally, I think everyone wants either a Steam Deck or a mobile port or a Switch port, which
Yeah.
I don't really
Yeah.
have the capability to do any of them at this moment, unfortunately. Steam Deck actually, I think, works okay. We've had a few demo reviewers say that it works fine, but yeah, I completely agree. And this is just again, like, I don't play these kinds of games, so it's just a bit of a blind spot for me personally.
Yeah.
That I'll know better going forward. But it is really important to engage with your fan base early and kind of ask them, what would you expect for a game like this and how would you play it and things like that. So yeah, definitely a thing I should have considered a little bit earlier on in development. But you live and you learn.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of spending 6 months on a game, is that, yes, that's a good investment, but it's not 3 years.
Yeah.
This isn't your magnum opus, and you've learned a lot. And releasing any game on Steam that's like a real game more than just some sloppy tech demo or something, like Puppy Park's a real game and people are enjoying it. So that's a huge step in game development. So well done. Kudos to you, even if it, maybe had a few hurdles along the way or just learning experiences. I would love to talk about like kind of the business side for just a couple questions if you're willing.
Absolutely.
Feel free to veto any of these if you want, but
Okay.
I'm just curious for sales, what your expectations were going in and how close you were to hitting whatever those were.
Yeah, I think it's really important to talk about the business side of things, because ultimately a large portion of the people watching this podcast, and myself included, we want to do this for a living. So if you don't consider the money aspect of it, then you'll never be able to do it for a living, I don't think, unless you're extremely skilled and you just make whatever you want and it happens to be the next Stardew Valley, which can happen. So my expectations were kind of all over the place in the run up to the release of the game. So at the announce phase, I kind of got a good enough response. So I kind of used Chris Zukowski's benchmark series to kind of see how my game would fare, in the months leading up to release, which obviously is just a guide, and a lot of the numbers are 5 years old now, so you can't really take them to the bank. But I'd say the kind of announce was pretty good. That was kind of like a mid-silver tier game. And then there was like a big lull where the daily, weekly wish lists weren't very high. They were kind of creeping into the silver, but not super, not super good. And then the demo metrics were really bad because obviously the game in one sitting, you can't play it for very long. So I kind of expected that, but it was pretty bad. But then I got fortunate, I guess, or well, it depends if you believe it's luck or not, but I got covered by a pretty prominent article or game site that produced an article about the game, calling it like the new Nintendogs, etc.
Ooh, yeah.
So that, I know, it has a pretty nice ring to it, doesn't it? So
yes,
again,
it
kind of comes back to like my idea for the game kind of came off in that way, right? I got an article that netted probably 1,000 wish lists going into Next Fest. So that was partly a good idea, I suppose, to make it a real-time Nintendogs inspired game. And then Next Fest went really well. So even though the demo numbers were pretty low, the wish lists were really, really good. I think I probably got 3,000 wish lists from Next Fest, something like that. So in the
Very
span
solid.
of about 2 weeks, I was like, okay, I have less than 2,000 wish lists. Definitely not going to hit popular upcoming. It's probably going to flop. And that's okay. That's fine. At that point, I'd become quite disillusioned with development as well, because I was like, well, if the game isn't going to break even, then, should I spend more time on it? Should I do another project? So I kind of just took a few weeks off. But then the article got written and Next Fest happened. And I was like, oh, we're actually going to make it into popular upcoming, which is crazy. So yeah, back full back to work, got some more things commissioned for the game and all this stuff. And then going into launch, I was kind of expecting maybe, between 10 to 20% wish list conversion number that people talk about, which basically just means your wish list at launch. How many sales do you have after a week compared to that number? So it's not necessarily your true wish list conversion number, because more people will wish list when you launch the game and things like that. So between 10 and 20%. So launched with just over 7,000 wish lists. So expecting anywhere between 700 to 1,400 sales in the first week. And we're on pace for the 700, but definitely not the 1,400. So definitely kind of falling short of the median benchmarks for games that release with popular upcoming. But I think a part of that is also not getting on new and trending, because that is also kind of linked to concurrent users and revenue and things like that. It's all just an algorithmic kind of thing. So maybe I shouldn't have expected to get closer to the 20%. And also, the infamous day one bugs of any game release that, come out of the woodwork also happened. And I was pretty quick to patch them, to be fair. But and people in the Discord were very kind. And yeah, I don't think it made a big impact to the core fan base that really wanted to play the game. But obviously, if 5% of players launch the game and encounter a bug, it's pretty easy to just refund it.
Yeah, so overall, how are you feeling about being close to the bottom of your benchmarks? Are you considering the game, obviously we've talked, you're proud of the game and it's a good game, but would you call it a success in terms of the business side of whatever you're trying to build?
Yeah, I think if the game is up for a year, it will just about break even after something like, all the commissions for artwork and music and things like that. And then maybe some minimum wage for my time, something like that. I think maybe after about a year, it will break even. But I think, you gain some kind of loyal fans in the Discord that will be there to QA your next game and play your demo. So I think even from a business standpoint, there are some things outside of the money that you can kind of say are successes, I guess. But I guess from a strict financial sense, it isn't a massive success, because I'm not going to quit my job to make my next game or anything like that. It's just going to add to the stack of kind of projects, and hopefully over time that stack builds up enough momentum to then have the big dream,
Yeah, and a couple of developers I've talked to, if you have a game that does, decent enough, you hit your 10 reviews. I think that's like kind of the biggest benchmark. I did see that as I checked in, even just like Monday or Tuesday, you had already hit that. But there's a surprising amount of like kind of trickle income that can still come if you keep up with sales and bundles. So there's something to that, in that you can keep that going and string a couple of those together for sure. I would like to dive into those couple of wish list, those two pieces of the wish list just a little bit more. Did you do anything, reach out to anyone to get that article, or was that just someone found your game and liked it?
Yeah. So I probably sent about 200 emails, which in retrospect probably isn't even enough. I think common wisdom is like maybe upwards of 500 to 1,000 emails to press. But I physically couldn't find that many press, sites that cover games like mine. So maybe I didn't dig hard enough, but I think there is some diminishing returns after about maybe 200, 300. You're really getting into some niche kind of sites. So yeah, I was fortunate enough to stumble across a list from someone on the How to Market a Game Discord. They shared a list of PR press contacts with me, and I just kind of sent a bunch of emails and got one response out of 200, but that's kind of all you need. I think that's an average kind of acceptance rate for indie games, and got really lucky.
Yeah, I think the important thing to note there is that it didn't happen by accident. I mean,
Mm.
we talk about this luck versus skill. Like, I love that question. And
Yeah.
yeah, it's luck if any one person writes an article, but if you
Yeah.
send 200 emails, that's less lucky to get one. So that's pretty cool that can be, you have an input there.
And also, it's why people so often say, make a good game first, because it just increases your odds of maybe not 1 in 200, but it's 5 in 200 next time if I had a better game, you know? So I really don't think there's that much luck to it, really. I think it's almost all skill. And I know people like Aramis and things have talked about this, and probably on your podcast as well. But the analogy I like to use is professional poker players. They always seem to make the final table. They might not always win a tournament. They might bottom out of a few tournaments, but over the span of a year, you'll see them on the final table in 50% of their tournaments. So how does that happen if the cards are all luck, you know? And it's the same thing with indie dev. I mean, you look at Danny, for example. He deliberately, chained himself to a moniker that wasn't associated with him to try and kind of even the playing field for the rest of us, which is quite nice. And then he makes a game that makes multiple millions in revenue anyway. Yep. So, like, is that luck? I can't imagine that's luck at all.
Yeah, I love the poker analogy because like poker, there are random elements to game dev because it's a part of life. Like, it's too complex for it to be zero luck, but we do get a lot of input. And it's funny how much, I don't think it's a big percentage of my audience, but even just on my last video, it's funny you bring up Aramis. I had brought up, he has a really good analogy where it's like, rolling a dice similar to D&D, but with game dev, like everything you're adding more dice to your pool. And so you can like really, there's like a scale of what a game might do. But if you send out 500 emails to press and 500 emails to streamers, you're raising the low bar so that you have a range now. And so, but someone on that video was like, how could it be any percent luck? Or I can't remember which way they picked, but almost every video that this comes up, someone has a strong opinion that probably hasn't released a game that it's all luck or it's all skill. But anyway, yeah, I like the poker analogy. It's very good. Because I think it's healthy to acknowledge the randomness in that we don't have full control, but to not let that be something that discourages us. I think that's the main thing with it, is like having some confidence that you can make the right moves at the poker table, that you can assess the randomness correctly and make the top table, so to speak. So I like that analogy.
And I guess another part of my experience that kind of inspired this kind of viewpoint is playing multiplayer games. Like, if you're trying to climb a ladder and you have 4 people on your team, you can either complain about them being bad every game, or you can just control what you can control. And it turns out, if you're really good at the game, you'll win 70% of the time anyway. And it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a super good call.
And
did you have another thought?
Another thought just related to kind of competitive esports in general is that even though this game might not have been like a financial success or anything, I like to think back to 16-year-old me and think, if I just made £10,000 playing video games, I'd probably quit my job and go pro immediately. Like, that'd probably be the best,
right.
In a tournament, that would probably be the best moment of my entire life, kind of thing. So it's all about perspective, I think. I think a lot of people have this idea that game dev is kind of like a real job that has like predictable outcomes. But I think it's more close to kind of like athletes or esports players, where there is a lot of randomness, and there's not like a steady amount of money that needs to be made in this field. You kind of just have to be exceptional and really skilled. And it's kind of like you should feel like kind of blessed that you're able to compete on this worldwide marketplace, I think. So
yeah, absolutely. I think of it much more in like the entrepreneurial spirit. Like, you're not signing up for a $2,000 paycheck every 2 weeks. You're signing up for some paycheck twice a year. Like, it's just, it's a lot more random, and, not literally like you're getting even with passive income and stuff, but it's much closer to that in that you're taking a very non-traditional form of income. You're betting on your own art and your own ability. And so, yeah, it's very interesting to think about, but also very cool. The other thing that, going all the way back to our Wishlist conversation, you mentioned that your Next Fest went very well despite the demo not being very good or not having very good, numbers. I'm curious if you, either in the stats on the back end of Steam or even just maybe by a vibe check, I've heard that a lot of Next Fest Wishlist don't even come from a demo play. It just comes from looking at the store page. Was that true for you as well? And maybe even more so because you had a really good art style?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely true. In the first order, it's definitely true that a lot of players do not play your demo during Next Fest. But the thing you have to consider is the second order of if a streamer goes through all the games in Next Fest and picks yours and streams that game, then you'll get even more wishlists. So the demo does have to be really good, and the odds of them seeing that are increased by your metrics being better of the demo in Next Fest. It's a bit of a, like with everything with Valve, it's a bit of a black box and you don't really know exactly what you'll get out based on what you put in. But I imagine that if you have a demo that's very well played, that by day 3 or day 4, Steam will push your game more during the Next Fest. I think there was a top 50 demos of Next Fest, and I imagine that's by playtime because I can't imagine what else it would be by. Maybe wishlist, but probably not. So yeah, there is a few like second order effects that mean you probably should care about your demo quite a bit and make sure that there are streamers playing it. And in the first instance, you make a game that streamers can play if you care about making money, probably. So lots to consider, I think.
Yeah, there's some interesting things happening with Next Fest specifically. I was listening to this podcast by a group of 3 developers called Butterscotch Shenanigans.
I love
For
those
anyone
guys.
that's heard of them. Yeah, they're very fun. And they were recounting their most recent Next Fest success. And they were comparing it to one they did a couple years ago with a relatively successful game. And they were saying that the success of Next Fest itself is shrinking. Like they would have expected based on their numbers to do better with this game because the rest of their numbers are better, but it did worse. But then they did get on that top 50 games played after the Next Fest, and that
Yeah.
brought like more wish lists than all of Next Fest combined.
There you
So
go.
they're doing some interesting things. It's more open than it's ever been, which is bringing down the value of one individual Next Fest, but there's also maybe now more potential because of that one widget. So some interesting things are happening there for sure.
And it's just an ever evolving kind of playing field, really. I mean, if you joined the first Next Fest, I can't imagine there were more than 300 games in that Next Fest. And when I released my first 2 games, I didn't even know what Next Fest was, for example. So as more YouTube videos get made and more information is shared around, everyone starts off in a better position. But as a result, there's more competition for the spots in the festivals. So it's just about kind of staying ahead of the curve, and running your own festival would be an example of that as well. Like, I mean, there was no thought that went into it at all on my part. It was kind of lightning in a bottle. I got rejected. I'm going to start my own one, maybe a little bit of spite more than anything. So yeah, just try and stay kind of forward thinking and think, what is the market going to look like in 6 months or a year? And how can I plan my game to kind of coincide with that and not just be purely reactionary and be like, what happened 6 months ago? Let me go and do that, because that's what everyone else is doing ultimately. And you kind of have to outcompete them, even though you're not strictly competing against your indie developer friends. I don't believe that at all. And if you share information, it's very good for everyone involved, which is partly why I'm here as well. But
Yeah, I mean, it's really not unlike the meta of any competitive game. Like,
absolutely,
everyone's looking for that one underutilized character or item, and once somebody finds it and figures it out, everyone else also does it, and then there's all these counters. And like you said,
exactly.
I'm also against the zero-sum game. I think that collaboration
Yeah,
amongst
yeah.
indies is more successful, but I like your take there a lot of just like, you can't just run back what's been done because it's an ever evolving meta, so to speak. And so you do
Yeah.
need to kind of keep up on it, put your own innovation into it. I think that's a really good mindset. Thanks for sharing the business side of that. I think that's super helpful. And like you mentioned, a lot of people listening are in a very similar boat as you. They're kind of trying to make it into the full-time game dev. And so that's super helpful. Before we wrap up, I had just a couple questions based on, I read through some reviews, is sometimes some ways I get to find some interesting bits. So just a couple thoughts based on those. One user really loved your sound design. Do you have any tips, or did you do anything interesting for sound design that other people could learn from?
I didn't do any formal study or anything like that. It was kind of just like play similar games, like maybe play in my example, play something like Animal Crossing, which I think has incredible sound design, and kind of see like when I press this button, what does it sound like and what should it sound like? And if you kind of use this like lens of everything in the game should serve the kind of fantasy or the theme of the game, then I think it becomes pretty easy to kind of fit the sounds in. I mean, maybe it's just something that I hadn't really had to think about, and I'm fortunate in that way. But I think if you really think like, I want this game to be cozy, I'm going to pick the coziest sound effects and sounds and things like that. But yeah, maybe just again, maybe it's just experience, talk to your players and see whether they like how the button sounds. I don't know if that's feasible to do for everything, but just get some feedback. If you don't have a good idea of what the button should sound like, then your players probably will.
Yeah, that makes sense. Another user mentioned that they felt one of the cons of the game was maybe limited content. How long does it take to actually do maybe all the daily tasks, and kind of what's the content drip, so to speak, in this being a real-time game?
Yeah, so it doesn't take a long time at all. I'd say the first time you boot the game, it probably only takes 15 minutes to do all of the tasks because you only have one dog. And that does gradually grow as you play the game. You get more dogs, but it's kind of a flaw to have the game develop that slowly from a kind of time commitment thing. I think you probably want to capture your audience at the first instance and maybe have a longer tutorial section. Like I probably, thinking back, could have easily done a thing where for the first few days, it's not a real time thing. It's just like you look after the dog, they leave, etc. You build up that kind of habit, and then you move on to the more real time daily interactions. And then from a progression standpoint, basically the only progression in the game is like this skill tree where you unlock new dogs or new items to play with your dogs or feed your dogs, things like that. And that's just a product of kind of having this kind of time scale of development, I suppose, and also having art be kind of the limiting factor. So when you commit to making a game that has an art style, you kind of need to have everything fit that art style. And if you're not good at art, then you become constrained by either your money in commissioning art or your skill in making the art yourself. So that's another thing that I think people should be really careful about is it's easy enough to say, I want to make a cozy game and I'm not very good at art, so I'm going to commission some art. Like that's a pretty reasonable idea. But what you have to realize is you have to be very sure about the scope of your game and all the art that you will pay for and will go into it. And if you don't have a very clear idea of that, then you can end up in a situation where maybe you want more content and you can't get it without some upfront cost, and not even just cost as well. It's like there's always a lead time for getting something. I don't mind sitting in my bedroom and coding for 10 hours if I need to do something by launch tomorrow, but I can't go to someone that is commissioning something and say, hey, I need something done in 3 days. It has to be like a week, 2 weeks, or sometimes a month for bigger work and things like that. My artist was super, super great and super understanding about all these, kind of my teething issues in getting this game released. So they were super amazing. But it's still, yeah, be careful about what your hard constraint is on your project when you're deciding at the start. As a result, I think my next project will not, I won't commission any art for it. I'll try my best to just make a game that doesn't need as much art. Because I'm a programmer for my day job, so I should have just picked a game that is program dependent, and I've learned that lesson the hard way. So, yeah.
Well, still a valuable experience, I'm sure. On the flip side of limited content, another user did say that they really thought the progression was satisfying. With it being a real-time game, is progression mostly the amount of dogs you get, or what does that actually look like?
So every time you kind of finish a visit, which is when the dog comes, you look after it and it goes, you get some reputation points, and then you use that reputation to basically unlock new features of the game. So yeah, it's quite a slow progression system because you can only earn so much, experience every day. But it's nice just being able to unlock new dogs and play with them in different ways. I think that's what people enjoy.
Yeah. Well, Cian, this has been a fantastic chat. Let me leave you with one final question. So this is the Dev Dream podcast, built to keep myself inspired mostly, but also others by hearing what cool developers like you have going on. So I'm curious for you, what would you say is your game development dream in this season of life?
My ultimate game development dream would just be able to do this full time. I think it's probably the same dream as a lot of other people watching this show, but I think the reasoning behind it is just having kind of the freedom to do whatever you want. You can wake up whenever you want. You can work from anywhere, and all these things. The downside of that is obviously you have to hold yourself accountable at that point. You have to be your own boss. The deadlines need meeting and things like that. Yeah, I just like the idea of, let's say on a Tuesday morning, the sun is shining. You can just drive to the beach if you want to. You don't have to sit in a stand-up in various meetings and listen to other people. So that's the dream. Hopefully we'll get there one day. Maybe the next game, who knows?
Well, Cian, that's a fantastic dream. I hope you're able to make it a reality. Thanks for joining me today. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks. It's been a pleasure.